It sounds like that it is encouraged as part of your job to not just know and learn about open source technology and projects and communities, but also become like participate in the ones that are relevant for the company and the area that you're working on at the moment.
I think not just encouraged, but necessary. Absolutely necessary.
What makes you say it's absolutely necessary?
Well, just as an example, we were talking about the SBOMs before. And there's multiple layers of intersecting communities that deal with SBOMs. And this is one area where we as a company have had to adjust processes and evaluations, et cetera, to facilitate the requirements that have been put in place by the government due to SBOMs. Until 4 years ago, until this executive order, I don't know how many companies were actually exchanging SBOM documents. I know that Kate Stewart from the Linux Foundation had been an advocate for SBOMs for at least a decade, but often you need that weight of either a case decision, a piece of legislation, or an executive order before you really engage in having the infrastructure and the processes and everything set up in the pipeline to make it happen. So with SBOMs, that very heavily involves SPDX, which is a project under the Linux Foundation, and their specification, as well as the legal group within the SPDX org that assigns the IDs to the licenses. So when I first got involved with the SPDX group, and their legal group specifically, I had a bit of an evolution for my thinking on how SPDX should be treated, because I joined it thinking that the matching guidelines that they had could be a way of discerning whether or not we should let a new open source license into the mix and assign an ID to it, and that we might say, let's try to curtail the number of licenses that are out there or that have IDs, so that, you know, maybe we could winnow it down to more consistent or fewer licenses, because that would certainly be more scalable to assess as a legal department. So I kind of came from it from that perspective of having been in legal and evaluating all these different licenses that are variations on a theme. And I was sort of the grumpy person on the call who would look at the latest BSD variant and say, really, do we have to assign an ID to this? Because it's got 3 words that are different from BSD 3. They just don't fit the matching guidelines. So do we really need another BSD variant in the SPDX pantheon? The SBOM movement completely flipped my attitude on its head. So I've done a 180 now, because having this machine readable mechanism to be able to ingest a document with the components that make up a software stack and the licensing that is part of it, if you include the licenses, and I've pushed really hard in some of the CISA community groups to include licensing in the SBOMs. By doing that, you can better scale the assessment and the application of policies and actually do a more complete job of assessing risk. So all of these pieces just fit together really, really nicely. And now I'm very much in favor of attaching an ID to every open source license that we come across, because it's going to ultimately make it easier to do the job. But all the pieces had to fall in place first. So when I first got involved in this organization, I had a completely different attitude than I do today. And a lot of that has changed because of the maturity of SBOMs in industry.
And the tooling around it, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's why I say it's necessary, because if I had not been involved in either the SPDX legal group or the CISA community groups, which are not strictly open source per se, but they're very strongly attached to the open source world. If I hadn't been involved in those community groups, I would not have been able to advocate for positions that can potentially make all of our work more scalable and more machine processable, I guess. That is a real advantage that then I bring back to HPE, because if we have these things in place, then once we have our SBOM, we can apply policies to it to give people an earlier heads up to say, hey, this works, this doesn't work, this has a warning, and that will let people make smarter choices in the long run.